Good evening, and thanks for joining our discussion about electronic identification. My name is Sandy Stitchen. I'm the Extension Livestock Educator for Taylor County. And with my colleagues, Regional Dairy Educator Ryan Steery and Wisconsin's Beef Specialist Bill Halfman, we are very pleased to prioritize and bring tonight's Zoom meeting to you all about this topic.
Well, thank you, Dr. Stitchen, and I want to take a chance here to thank all of you at UW Extension for scheduling this and helping us out with presenting this information and giving us this opportunity. We really do appreciate that. I am Gretchen May. I'm a veterinarian with the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, and I work with the traceability programs there. And we'll be going over changes to the federal rule that will be going into effect November 5th of this year. And the changes to that rule, the purpose of those are to transition to electronic ID as official ID for cattle and bison. So we'll start by going over the changes to the rule, and then we'll do a quick review of when official ID is and is not required in Wisconsin. And finally, we'll touch on some information on ordering tags if you happen to need them and tag application. So the most significant change with this rule is that effective November 5th, 2024, when cattle and bison need official ID applied, that ID needs to have both a visual and an electronic component. Except for one change, which I'll get to in a couple of slides, the rule does not change when cattle and bison need official ID, just that when official ID needs to be applied, it must have the visual and the electronic component. The rule is written in a way to be able to allow the approval of new technologies as they become available, but right now, the only tags that meet these requirements are the 840 radio frequency or RFID tags. The 840 numbers are 15-digit numbers, which start with 840, and that's the US country code. These tags are intended for animals of US origin. And this picture that I have here is an example of an 840 RFID tag. So both the visual and the electronic components are all contained in this one tag. You can use an RFID reader to pick up the 840 number. And then as you can see, that number is also printed on the tag. So you can see it visually as well. The tags don't hold any additional information. The only thing that's encoded in the tag is the 840 number. So when you read it with the reader, that's the only thing that you can see. And then I did want to bring up RFID tags with other countries' codes. We do see cattle here from other countries, especially those from Canada. And when they're imported into the US, they're required to have their own official RFID tag. Similar to the 840 tags, these are 15-digit numbers, but instead of starting with an 840, they start with 124, and that's Canada's country code. So these tags are official ID, and they can be used as official ID. So if you have animals with 124 tags and they need official ID for testing, vaccination, or movement purposes, this tag does serve that purpose, and they should not be removed. If they lose their 124 tags, first of all, if they're staying on the farm or don't otherwise need official ID, you don't need to replace these. But if they do need official ID after they've lost their ID, there is a new import RFID tag that can be used for this purpose. So again, you don't want to place 840 tags in these animals because they're not from the US. If you do need one of those import RFID tags, you can contact your veterinarian and they can help you out with that. So this is the situation that has changed concerning when official ID is required. And that change is a clarification to the definition of dairy cattle in the federal rule that includes crossbred calves of any breed that are born to dairy cattle. So this means that effective November 5th, these dairy beef crossbreds will need to be identified as dairy cattle for interstate movement. And this information here is really more for your veterinarians, but I wanted to mention it here because your veterinarians may need to spend more time getting official ID information for your dairy steers and your dairy beef cross steers that are going to be moving across state lines. Dairy steers have been required to have official ID to cross state lines for many years now. And as we already discussed on November 5th, the dairy beef cross steers will also need to be identified as dairy animals. But up until now, a statement on the CVI that dairy steers are officially identified has been sufficient, and your veterinarian has not been required to list out the official ID like it is required already for other types of cattle that need ID for interstate movement. So again, I just wanted to mention that because you may see a change in what your veterinarian needs to do. If you do have cattle that are tagged with visual only official tags prior to November 5th of 2024, those animals are considered officially identified for their lifetime. So if you have animals that already have the silver metal official tags or the orange brucellosis vaccination tag or a visual only 840 tag, those animals do not need to be retagged unless they both lose their ID and are being moved, tested, or vaccinated under circumstances that require official ID. And just to make sure that it's clear, this change does only affect cattle and bison. 840 RFID tags are available for use in other species, and there are people that do use those tags for those species, but other species are not affected by this rule. So now we'll start to go into scenarios as to when official ID is and is not required in Wisconsin. And we'll start with movements or situations where the cattle are not leaving the state of Wisconsin. That first scenario would be when they are staying on their home farm. Wisconsin has no requirements for official identification for Wisconsin cattle and bison staying on their home farm. So if that's the case for you, then this rule does not affect you. Wisconsin also does not have any requirements for official ID if Wisconsin cattle and bison are moving within the state from farm to farm or to Wisconsin slaughter plants. And we also don't have any requirements for official ID for Wisconsin cattle and bison moving within the state to a Wisconsin fair, recreational event, show, or exhibition. So again, that's no change, and that continues to be the case. But I do like to mention that some individual events may elect to require certain types of ID, including potentially official ID to attend the event. So we'd always recommend checking with the event, and if you want to attend, making sure that you are meeting the requirements that they have. Now we'll move into some of the times when cattle are staying within the state when they actually do require official identification. So for these situations, the change in the federal rule would apply. So when Wisconsin cattle and bison are being vaccinated against brucellosis, they must have official ID. So again, the requirement for official ID is not changing for these situations, just that when official ID is being newly applied, on or after November 5th, it must be that 840 RFID tag. And I'll make a few comments here about orange tags. If any of you are having your animals vaccinated against brucellosis, your veterinarians may be using that orange metal tag for the vaccine. So again, as of November 5th, that will no longer be available for use as official ID. There are orange 840 RFID tags available to veterinarians for brucellosis vaccinations. So they can use orange tags when applying official ID for brucellosis vaccination, but the orange tags are optional. So really any 840 RFID tag can be applied. Any color tag, any 840 RFID style of tag is perfectly acceptable. And if a calf already does have an 840 RFID tag at the time of vaccination, another 840 RFID tag should not be applied and the existing tag should be recorded instead. Wisconsin cattle and bison that are being tested for regulatory diseases continue to have requirements for official ID. So when testing for tuberculosis or TB, brucellosis or Johne's disease, these situations do require official ID, just like they have in the past. And some of you may be aware there is currently an order in effect for lactating dairy cattle that are going to fair shows and exhibitions for an influenza test prior to arriving at the event. So testing for influenza would fall into the same category, and those tests would require official ID as well. Markets and dealers have official ID requirements for Wisconsin cattle and bison, even if those cattle and bison are remaining within the state. However, there have been no changes to this particular requirement as far as when the ID is required. And there are exceptions to that which remain the same as before. One of the main exceptions would be cattle being sold for slaughter. There's no requirement for official ID in that situation. Also, calves under 6 months are exempt from official ID requirements, no matter if they are beef or beef or dairy crosses. Feeder cattle are exempt, and steers, both dairy beef and dairy beef crosses, would be exempt from those requirements as well. Now we'll move into interstate movement requirements. There are more requirements for official identification when cattle and bison are moving across state lines. But as I mentioned before, there's been no change to this with the exception of those dairy beef crosses. So this is when official ID is required is the same as what it's been for some time. If they're moving across state lines for rodeos, recreational events, shows, or exhibitions, they need to have official ID no matter what their age, breed, or sex. And then if you're importing cattle and bison into Wisconsin, official ID is required for all of those animals except for beef steers. So this would include feeders unless they're beef steers. And the only changes related to this going into effect November 5th then would be that if you've got your dairy beef crosses, those steers would need to be identified as dairy steers. And obviously, if official ID is being newly placed after November 5th, that would need to be the 840 RFID. When sending cattle out of Wisconsin to other states, they need to meet the minimum requirements of the USDA. So they need to have official ID if they are dairy cattle of any age or sex, including steers and the dairy beef crosses, and also if they're sexually intact beef cattle 18 months of age and over. But we always recommend that you work with your veterinarian when you're sending these animals across state lines, and they can help you check with the state of destination. There are often additional requirements that are needed for these types of movements. Generally, a certificate of veterinary inspection or a health paper is going to be required. Some states might have more strict ID requirements than what the federal requirements are. And they may also have testing, vaccination, or health statements that need to be included on the health paper. And then when moving across state lines, there continue to be no official ID requirements for cattle and bison moving interstate directly to slaughter. There's been no change with that. And they can continue to move interstate directly to no more than one federally approved livestock facility. These are often markets in other states. You can check with the state of destination or the market to see if they are federally approved and they can accept these animals without official ID. When federally approved livestock markets are accepting these animals from out of state, as they can do, they may have requirements for health papers and official ID to be able to release the cattle, depending on where they're coming from and what their destination is. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about how you can get official 840 RFID if you're not familiar with that already. You can obtain and apply these tags directly. When you order, you just need to have your livestock premises code, which you'll also hear us refer to as a premises ID or a PIN. And you get this number by registering your premises. And Julie Sweeney with WLIC will be talking about that in just a little bit. When you get the tags, you can't share them or sell them or otherwise transfer them. They need to be used on your farm. They're assigned to your farm, and they shouldn't be sent to other places. I will mention that although we are out of our tags for this year, so we don't have any available right now, periodically we do have free tags available from USDA. We're waiting right now to see what next year is going to look like, depending on what kind of funding USDA is able to get for these tags. So there'll be more information coming on that once we know it. When they are available, we'll be putting them on our Wisconsin Veterinary Supply Product Catalog, and you can check that periodically if you want to. You can access that if you just go to Google and Google DATCP, DATCP, Veterinary Supply Catalog. That's the first thing that pops up when I use that to Google. You can also purchase tags from any approved manufacturer or one of the approved manufacturer's vendors. Sometimes animal health supply sources will have them. I've seen them from Valley Vet. I think NASCO has them. WLAC sells these, and Julie Sweeney again will be talking a little bit about what they may have available. So any of those options are good options. We have on our website a list of approved manufacturers along with their contact information. If you go to our main page, datcap.wi.gov or datcp.wi.gov, and use the search fields and put in their official ID and traceability, the first thing again that will come up will be this page where we have that information listed. And also on that page, we have a link to a document that, again, not only lists the manufacturers, but also provides more information about the tags and gives some pictures of them. So if you haven't ordered tags before, if you need them and you are trying to figure out what you might want to purchase, this is kind of a nice resource to be able to look at. And if you already are using tags, but you're interested in checking out your other options, this is a good resource as well. So I'm just going to take a break from this for a second, just to show you that document, because it is a little bit overwhelming if you're not used to it. But once you get used to it, it can be very helpful. Okay, so here's that document. You don't need to remember anything about this document. The intent of me showing this to you is just to let you know that this is available, and it can be a really nice resource if you're just kind of wondering what types of tags you might want to use. The first couple of pages here are just information on 840 tags, so you can look at that as you may be interested. But on page 3 here, it starts listing the approved manufacturers. These are listed in alphabetical order, not in order of preference of use. Anything that's on this list as an RFID tag is acceptable to use. So any of these you can check into, and if you're interested in using them, these would be perfectly fine as official ID. I'll just point out a couple of things on this document here. Again, Allflex is the example that's up here now. We can see their name in the upper left-hand corner, and then we can see their contact information to the right of that. When we scroll down a little bit, we come to this first table, and you can see that this says that there are 840 visual tags. These are visual tags that are currently approved and available for use until November 5th, so that's why they're still on this document. But if you're looking at this, you do want to be careful looking at the type of tag to make sure that you're looking for 840 RFID tags. And I am assuming that USDA will update this document as November 5th arrives and remove these tags from this list. But just to kind of give an example here, again, we can see under the type column, these are visual tags. To the right, we can see a species column, so you can see what species each individual tag is approved for. And then below that, you can see pictures of the tags that correspond to the table above by number. So if we scroll down a little bit, we can see the same thing here now for the Allflex 840 RFID tags. We can see again here, these are RFID tags under the type, and the species are again listed. And then we've got our pictures of the tags, so you can see what they look like. You'll see on this document as well some injectable transponders. These are not available for cattle and bison. You can see here that for this particular one, this is approved for use in horses and deer and elk. So I just wanted to point that out. You can just kind of scroll over those if you're looking for cattle and bison. The next couple of companies here only have transponders, so we're just going to kind of scroll past those. And then we get to Datamars here is our next approved manufacturer. We've got their contact information. We start here with the injectable transponders, so we're going to scroll through that. Here are the visual tags, so we're going to scroll through that. And then we get to the RFID tags here again. And once again, species on the right-hand side, and we've got pictures. So you can scroll through this whole document and see, here's Destron Fearing, and we've got leader products, Shearwell, the different options for Shearwell, these FOFIA tags, and Y-Tex. So again, you don't need to remember any of this, but it is kind of a nice resource if you're curious about what types of tags are available. Also, you can look at different options for price points. Some tags may cost more or less than others and may or may not fit your needs. And also different tag manufacturers may have tags available more or less quickly. So depending on what you need, you may be able to get something a little bit more quickly, perhaps. So just a good resource there. Then when applying official 840 RFID, These tags can be applied in any ear. I understand that some of the instructions that come with the tag suggest using the left ear, but the reason for that is just to avoid interfering with the brucellosis vaccination tattoo, which is required to be in the right ear. So that's really the only reason that that's suggested. There's no legal requirement for using one ear over the other. When 840 RFID is applied, only one tag can be in an animal, so you don't want to apply another tag. And then to read the tags with electronic readers, for the low frequency tags, you do have to be really close to these animals to be able to read. With the handheld reader, you have to be within about a foot, and there are stationary readers that people can get as well. But even then, you need to be within about 4 feet. There are some ultra high frequency tags that have been approved by USDA, but it's my understanding, I think that there's just one manufacturer that's been approved to make those, and that company is not actually producing them. So right now, we really don't see any of those UHF tags that are available. But if they become more available in the future, you can read those from a little further away, about 8 feet with the handheld reader and about 20 feet with the stationary reader, but you still have to be relatively close to read those. And then when placing the ear tags, you want to try to get them between the two ribs of cartilage here. Thank you, Dr. Stitchen and Bill, for providing this slide with this nice model here. In this case, the RFID is placed a little bit closer to the head, about the first quarter of the ear. And then if you do want to add a dangle tag, that can come out a little bit to about the middle third of the ear. And then you might want to just be aware of your needs for the possibility of an implant. If you're planning to place an implant, or if you are raising your animals and further down the line, it seems likely that there might need to be an implant placed. Just being aware to leave room for the implant. So those implants go under the skin on the back side of the ear, about the middle third of the ear, or if needed, perhaps the top shelf of the ear. And when placing the implants, you want to stay about an inch away from the tags or any tag holes. You can also get 840 RFID tags from your veterinarian for applications. So veterinarians can apply tags to your animals. They do need to keep a record of that tag application. What they can't do, veterinarians can't, well, they may not be able to hand you tags or to leave them at your farm unless they become an animal identification number or AIN device manager. Some veterinarians may choose to do that and others may not. It does have additional record keeping requirements. So again, your veterinarian may be a source of tags for you, especially if you need them to apply the tags. And this is the last thing I'll touch on here. I just wanted to give a little bit of information about the databases that are used for official 840 RFID. This tag distribution information is stored in state, meaning here at DATCAP, and federal or USDA animal health databases. And this information is treated securely. So only animal health officials who respond to disease outbreaks have access. And of course, just like with anything else, there are different levels of security and identity verification that you need to go through to have access to these databases, passcodes, and all that kind of thing. Tag distribution data, especially in the federal databases, is associated to a premises ID, not a name or address. So there's really not a lot of extra information that you can see associated with that information. And then here in Wisconsin, there are statutes that keep both state premises registration data and individual animal identification records confidential. That's under Wisconsin statutes 95.185 and 95.51. And that information cannot be released except as described in statute. So Wisconsin has taken that information and the protection of that information very seriously. And I know Julie will talk about that a little bit here in a moment as well. All right, so that's all that I have. We can certainly take any questions.
So we had two come in so far, and maybe, well, three, I guess. So the first one was early on. This came in right after you just started. What about beef heifers and dairy heifers? Will they need tags?
So that depends on the situation. If they're staying on the farm, they don't require ID. If they're moving within the state, they don't require ID. Uh, Depending on what they're used for, if they're moving through the market, they may or may not need official ID. If they're feeders, they would not need official ID. If they're breeding animals, then they would, depending on their age, or might, depending on their age. Then, if they're moving across state lines, that's a different situation. So, if they're going to a show or recreational event, then they would need official ID. If they're being exported from Wisconsin, then they would, if they are dairy beef heifers, then they would need official ID if they're being exported or moved interstate for any purpose. And then beef heifers would be exempt from official ID if they're under 18 months of age. And then coming into Wisconsin, they would all need official ID. So kind of a complicated answer. It just depends on the scenario and the situation.
It's an extension answer. It depends.
Yeah.
And again, going back to your veterinarian, the minute you think you're doing something, moving animals anywhere, is it safe to say, talk to your vet and let them help you figure out what you need?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And like I mentioned, there may be additional requirements besides identification requirements if you're moving those animals across state lines. So they can help you figure all of that out.
Okay, the next question is, if I am selling a beef cow at a sale barn in state with the intention that a kill buyer will purchase her, do I need to put in an RFID in case the next destination ends up not being slaughter?
At this time, I'll say no.
And there was another question again with sale barns. If I'm taking cattle to a sale barn like Equity, will those cattle need RFID tags? Or is it up to the sale barn to decide if it's necessary or not?
Yeah, it would depend on the situation once they're there. Yeah, depending on where it's going.
A question I put in to remind myself to ask, is it important to purchase the tagger that corresponds to the tag? Or do the
Yes.
taggers work on multiple products?
Thank you for asking that. That is a very good question. So none of the tag manufacturers that I know of, at least, will guarantee the use of their tags with another company's taggers. So I do recommend getting a tagger that corresponds to the manufacturer of the tag that you are purchasing as well, or acquiring if you are able to get some of the free tags. They are much more likely to have better retention if you're using a tagger that matches up with the brand of tag. That's not the same for readers. So the readers and the tags are all working at a standardized frequency. So if you have a reader, that will read all of the tags. But when you're talking about the taggers, the way I understand it is important to match up a tagger from one manufacturer with the tag that you have.
And that's probably one of those things where you actually should read the instructions that come with the tagger so that you put it in correctly and squeeze the trigger correctly and position the ear correctly, because none of us have put a fly tag in backward or other tags in the wrong way. And maybe that doesn't matter because it's RFID, but visually it helps to put it in the right spot.
And I'll say too, when I've reached out to representatives of the tag manufacturers, they've been really helpful too. So if you have any questions, you can certainly reach out to them as well.
Okay, we got another question here. If we sell dairy steer feeders at Equity, will they need the RFID tags, or is it just safe to put them in case they go to another state?
So the question is well worded in that it kind of depends on what's going to happen with them. So if they're staying within the state as steers, they would be exempt from official ID requirements. If they are going across state lines, they would need official ID. And I think what I might suggest in a situation like this is maybe to reach out to the market and see what they would prefer.
Dr. May, is it safe to say it's the responsibility of the owner at the time the animal crosses state line to make sure it's correctly ID'd?
Yes, from a federal standpoint, I know that they do consider both the people who are sending and receiving the animals to be responsible for the tag being placed.
Yeah, I guess they talk to the sale barns, but you have no idea who's going to buy them when you take your feeders to the sale barn.
So maybe we'll let you, Dr. May, take your slide set down and we'll let Julie put hers up and we'll await more questions. Here's a question while we switch slides. Do you foresee with the situation above, so this is the dairy steer feeders going to equity. Do you foresee with that situation that potentially not having RFIDs in the animal's ear will affect purchasing?
I don't think that I would be qualified to answer that question as far as how that would affect a buyer's choices.
There's a couple of equity reps on tonight, but I'm not going to put them on the spot and ask them. Talk to the rep, talk to the manager. You and I together, we wrote an article that was supposed to be in the Wisconsin State Farmer newspaper, and I haven't received my copy yet, so I don't even know if it was in there. But we talked about if you know who your buyer is, between the two of you, you can decide who's bearing the cost of putting that tag in, or, if it's going to another state, if there's other things that have to be done to it. Does it need TB? Does it need whatever? You can work together, decide who's paying for what. Is the buyer doing it or is the seller doing it? In the same situation, since RFID is linked to premise ID, is it reasonable to expect that RFID would be linked to the market's premises?
If they received the tag, the answer would be yes. If they received the tag and applied it, the answer would be yes.
First of all, thank you to UW Extension Livestock, as well as Dr. May, for letting me join in this webinar. I am Julie Sweeney. I'm the Executive Director at the Wisconsin Livestock Identification Consortium. In a world or in an industry dominated by acronyms, that's commonly known as WLIC. And I'm here to tell you all about what we're doing as a nonprofit working with DACAP to help with the traceability efforts here in the state of Wisconsin. WLIC is a private nonprofit organization that works to protect animal health and prevent the spread of disease through livestock and premises identification and traceability. Now, we originally began, now you might wonder what inspired WLIC to start here in the state of Wisconsin. Well, back in 2001, which feels so long ago, it was already over 2 decades ago, but many of you may remember the foot and mouth outbreak that absolutely decimated the United Kingdom's livestock industries. Here on this slide, I have a few photos just kind of capturing what it was like at that time to kind of deal with this. The first one being a sign that was limiting traffic as they dealt with the virus spread. To the far right was a wheel wash that attempted to help sanitize vehicles and tires. But really the most hard-hitting image is in the middle there, where cattle literally had to be burned up, incinerated, and buried. The crisis itself led to more than 6 million cows and sheep being killed, costing the UK an equivalent of 10 billion US dollars. The interesting thing to note here, as you all know, the United Kingdom is basically an island. It's surrounded by water. It would be interesting to consider what risk this would have had spreading to other countries if the country wasn't able to basically isolate itself from spreading the disease to other close-knit countries. So it's always good to remember what crises have happened that we kind of look back to and want to avoid here in the US. So with that being said, WLIC was founded in 2001 through a partnership between CRI, Cooperative Network, and the Wisconsin Farm Bureau. We were established officially as a nonprofit in 2003, and then at that time, WLIC's responsibilities had been given 3 areas of focus. The first being premises ID, that we as an organization were issuing and managing the premises IDs for each individual farm in Wisconsin, wherever livestock would be held. We also help with animal identification, basically helping keep the records, specifically with CVIs and others that pertain with premises IDs, and bringing it full circle to provide a system of animal traceability. Our original funding for WLIC came from a grant funded by USDA and APHIS. Today, we are funded by the state legislature budget, as well as individual sponsorships from industry sponsors. WLAC was tasked with developing a state-based model for livestock premises registration and traceability into what we now know today as our every 3 years getting all the premises registrations renewed. So at that same time, and now this was 2 years after the crisis had happened in the UK, many of you may recall that headline about the cow that stole Christmas. Last year, they had done a bit of a recap of what it was like 20 years ago when this happened and kind of halted the livestock industry here in the US. On December 24th, 5 tons of raw beef were recalled by a Washington state meat inspector that it was believed they may have been exposed to tissues containing the infectious agent causing mad cow disease. It was just that day before that a cow in Washington state had also been identified as the first animal with the disease in the US. I believe that that animal had originally come from Canada that was dealing with some of this at the same time. Regardless of all the assurances that we could provide to our export partners in foreign countries, that there was no risk of the spread of this disease and that no additional cattle in the US had this mad cow disease, several countries had suspended their US beef imports. And it wasn't a matter of a couple weeks or a couple months. It took years for several of these foreign countries to reestablish us as a beef export partner. As you can imagine, that had quite devastating impacts to the millions of pounds of beef that had nowhere to go. So it's definitely something from a ripple effect that we want to try to avoid just dealing with that again. This was only one cow. Granted, there was the cow and then the meat from the day following, but still, the fact that there were no other positive tests, just knowing the impact of what that was kind of just devastating. Because that happened, then in early 2004, Wisconsin legislature passed a law mandating premises registration. In doing so, it allows that WLAC today works in stride with the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, renewing and registering premises as they come into our office. Every 3 years, all livestock premises are renewed to ensure the database records remain up to date. So that means that WLAC basically equips the Department of Agriculture with information that should there be a disease outbreak or a concern when it comes to animal health, they have the resources to quickly evaluate how many farms of a certain species might be within a region, whether it's limited to one county or a region of the state. So they can quickly evaluate what that looks like and how many people might be impacted, and then also quickly communicate. So it's very important that we have relevant contact information. So why WLAC? Well, WLAC is not a government agency, and therefore the data that we manage is protected against the Public Information Act or Freedom of Information Act, also known as FOIA. As well, producer data is further protected by the actual Wisconsin statute 95.51 and the administrative code 17.03, literally outlining that this information is to remain confidential. And because of where it exists, it's essentially against the law to share this information with commercial or the general public. So people could call us and we can't share their information with them unless they are truly the owner of the premises. Our contract with DACAP also restricts the access to the database and disclosure of the data. So there's a couple layers of confidentiality built in, protecting your information as a livestock owner. Okay, sharing a little bit about what is considered livestock in the state of Wisconsin, at least when it comes to a premise registration. Of course, there's the beef cattle, dairy cattle. This also includes bison, any South American camelids, meaning alpacas and llamas. Also captive cervids, meaning deer, elk, moose, caribou, reindeer. Anything within that family also needs to be registered as a livestock premises. And of course, we need pigs, goats, and sheep and chickens. Fun fact, even if you have one chicken and you're in the inner city of any city in the state of Wisconsin, we want to hear from you. We got to register your livestock, even if it's that one pet chicken you have. All sorts of poultry, whether that's captive game birds or rat types. We also register horses, even though they're not often referred to as livestock. They are considered that here, as well as mules and donkeys. Then we also register fish farms. In addition to that, who needs to register? So of course, anybody with those species of livestock, even if it's just one backyard chicken. A couple of other types of people that would need to register would be veterinarian offices and other animal health officials, livestock markets, and truckers. Anyone who sells ear tags, including WLAC, we're in the system. Animal testing labs, slaughterhouses, pond owners, that country store that has reindeer for the Christmas season. So even though they don't necessarily have a barn, or it's such a short stint of why they would have livestock on their property, we still want to know that they do, so that it's in the system, even if it's just for a short period of time. As well, we want to recognize all fairs, expos, and circuses within the state of Wisconsin for any duration time of the year. Now, how to register your livestock premises. This is very easy. This should not be intimidating at all. You can go online. You can register at our website, which is at wiid.org. The form is easy to access if you just go to that homepage. Once you complete your online information and submit it, you usually receive a confirmation email with your premises ID code within 1 business day, but it may take up to 3 business days. You could also go online and print the form, complete it, and mail it in if you're not so savvy with online forms, or feel free to call us. Our number is below. It's 888-808-1910. Whether that's me, Hannah, or Christina, we would be happy to help you get registered over the phone and answer any questions you have. I'd like to also draw attention to the fact that WLAC does sell livestock ear tags, RFID ear tags, online through our online store. So thank you to Dr. May for mentioning that a little bit before. Purchases from our online store, these items, whether it's just animal ear tags or it's an applicator like a tagger, or even if it's a wand reader to be able to read the RFID numbers, we sell all of these types of tools and items. So be sure to check out our online store if that's something that you're interested in or you think you'll need, especially as November 5th is coming up. All the purchases help support our organization and the mission. And when it comes to payment, we do take checks as well as the credit card online. So hopefully you learned a thing or two here, but one of the ways that you can truly help DATCAP and overall the industry that we all care so much about is to proactively contact WLAC to renew your livestock premises. We are actively starting that renewal year, even though it's in 2025. We've started taking the initiative to ask all those that are existing in the database to start updating their information. We're starting with email, so if you haven't gotten a letter yet, that'll be coming in a couple months, but you can save us the effort and just call us and we can get your information updated right away. That would be so lovely. So feel free to call us anytime or go online. But that is really easy, and being proactive about it saves us the effort then in trying to contact you after that. You will need to register, renew all the locations where livestock are kept. So if you have more than one main location where you keep livestock, we will want to re-register both of them or make sure that both are registered to begin with. And just to reiterate as well, the information that we care about is just your contact information. So a name, phone number, email, the address for the premises, and then the livestock that are there. I don't care what breed, I don't care how many, I only care about the locations, how to contact you, and how many species are located there. Overall, your help in updating livestock premises is vital to ensure your information remains up to date, and that in such a crisis, DATCAP would be able to quickly contact you and keep you in the loop. Our goal in this renewal effort is that we would have everybody registered by July 31st of 20. This renewal cycle is to wrap up the renewal by 2025. Everybody that's renewed by then will then be renewed through July 31st of 2028. Just to reiterate a little bit about our impact in working with DATCAP, we are a unique animal disease traceability organization in the U.S. From what I know, there is no other nonprofit organization dedicated to livestock premises that protects the producer data like WLAC does. Overall, this system allows DATCAP to be equipped with valuable information during a very vulnerable situation. The better the information we have, the quicker they can move and react, and the less of an impact that such an animal disease truly has on an industry like ours, and would hopefully avoid shutting down a business and overall commerce of cattle and any type of livestock. Like I just said, the state allows them to quickly evaluate that level of risk in that area of the state, efficiently communicate to potentially impacted livestock owners like yourself, and again, quickly mitigate the risk where possible. So being able to update your premises is so important. I hope that we'll hear from you sometime soon or help hear that you're spreading the word about the importance of it. But overall, I appreciate you being here and listening to my presentation. I don't know that there'd be many questions, but I will take any that there are.
Our city owns the fairgrounds and has a premises ID. As the fair, do we also need to have a premise ID? And in parentheses, I think right now we have two. So I think we have two. So do we need two IDs?
Technically, every location where there's livestock has a unique premises ID. So the fairground should only actually have one premises ID, unless I'm misunderstanding something, or Dr. May might understand a little bit differently as well. But every location, so regardless that the city owns the fairgrounds is itself one location, and that premises ID is specific to that location. So great question to lead into this as well. Let's say you are a renter and you move from one premises to a different premises. The premises ID stays at the location. So unfortunately, with the new location, you'd have to re-register or find out what that premises ID is for that location. Premise ID is specific to the address to that location and not to the person. Oh, well, like right now with the renewal year, if somebody had sold a property and someone else owns it, now is a really great time for us with the effort that we're going through to make sure that the ones that do have livestock on it, whatever the species are and whether they've changed, that we get that all updated properly. It's especially important if like a older generation had passed down the farm to the younger generation. So maybe there's a different cell phone, a different name, maybe there's email affiliated with it now. This is our opportunity to get that updated, and then you can get important updates via email, and then just proper contact information can be available there as well.
You answered my question. The premise ID stays with the premise. So if you move, you leave your premise ID behind you, and you have to get a new one for that premise or find out from that seller, from that person you are now moved to, if they had one, and change the contact information on it.
Yeah. So that gets tricky for people that are renting, especially because sometimes they might be renting the facility but not living there. So it always depends upon who feels will be more communicative, but we prefer to have the premises owner as the key contact person if they are able to be like a good key contact. You know, if they're not going to provide us their email and they're, take the phone call or whatever, that's not very helpful. But renters will want to ask the premises owner for that premises ID. Okay. Especially whether they take animals to the county fair or they often take them to the market. That would be the way to get the premises ID.
So a new question. If a farm owns buildings on each side of the road, they're a quarter mile apart, and animals go back and forth, are there two different addresses for each and there are two different addresses for each building site? Does that require two different IDs?
So sometimes when this happens, there might be two premises IDs established, but ultimately this is what we would consider a contiguous location, meaning that the property on one side of the road is basically that it is separated by a road, but beyond that, it is kind of one same region. So the one original premises ID is sufficient to work for both of those. I don't know if Dr. May wants to add any additional information there.
No, I think that's perfect, Julie, but I will add or take this moment to add that what's important to register is the location of the livestock. Related to this question, I'm hearing that the livestock are at both of the locations, but we do have people sometimes with the house at one location and livestock at a totally separate location, and they register the house location, and you want to actually register the livestock location. But yes, as Julie mentioned, if you've got locations if you own property that's contiguous and separated only by a roadway or a stream or something like that, that would be considered to be one location, and you'd only need the one premises registration.
That's a great question.
Yeah, and follow up, what would be a maximum distance for a region? What would a maximum distance be for a region? What would no longer be considered contiguous?
And it would be your parcels on the map. So if they're all touching, if all those parcels are touching, that would be contiguous or separated again by a roadway or a stream. But if you've got a parcel and then there's a separation between one parcel that you own and other parcels that you own, then those would not be contiguous and you'd need separate registrations for those.
So not that I appreciate both of you taking the time to go over this again with everyone. I shouldn't say again, going over this with us. Thanks to our presenters, Dr. Gretchen May, Veterinary Program Manager, Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, Division of Animal Health, and Julie Sweeney, Executive Director of the Wisconsin Livestock Identification Consortium. This concludes our program about official identification using electronic ID and premises registration. We hope to see you at future UW-Madison Division of Extension livestock programs.